Good morning. Welcome to The Point. We start our program today talking about the water well contamination in Kent County. We sat down with State Senator Peter MacGregor, who represents some of those areas currently being tested, and talked about the problem. Senator, I've talked with some of your colleagues, and I know it's a concern to them as well as it is to you about whatever it is that's going on with water, right now at least, much of it is in your district. We should point out, because sometimes we talk about Rockford, but we already know that the Rockford city water has been tested and doesn't contain this PFAS, the PFAS,
right,
that we know was used in some manufacturing and could have been dumped in a number of places. Bring us up to speed kind of where we are, because just before we sat down, we had brand new developments too that the governor has put together a task force. Let's talk a little bit about where we are in trying to get to the bottom of what's going on.
So this is drinking water that we're talking about, and what's contaminated in certain areas, and it's so far mostly have been Plainfield Township, the northern part of Plainfield Township, in legal dumping sites. These were disposal sites back prior to the 1970s, before any real environmental laws on contaminated or industrial waste was really brought to the light. So when talking about drinking water, we're worried about these contaminated wells, and working with the DEQ, the Kent County Health Department, myself, the governor's office. He just assigned a task force to look at this, and not just for Kent County, but for the whole state, because this is not isolated to Belmont or Kent County. The problem is it's such an emerging contaminant that we know so little. There's so little science, there's so little research, there's so little data about it, because it is so tiny that we're talking parts per trillion. You look at any other contaminant out there, it's usually parts per billion or parts per million. There's only maybe a dozen companies in the United States can actually test parts per trillion. And that's been part of the problem, is that since there's so few of these pieces of equipment that can test to parts per trillion, the results are not coming back instantly. Everybody wants instant results. So there's been areas that have come back with the advisory level of 70 parts per trillion for a lifespan of 70 years. What does that mean, 70 years? It means if you drink 2 quarts of this every day of your life, or for 70 years, there's potential of some health risks. Now, there's higher potential if you're pregnant, or if you have other illnesses, or if you're elderly. But it's something that other states have been dealing with right on the fringe. I think we're going to start to be the leader of the knowledge of what to do when you have these hot spots in well water of these PFASs, which is the per and polyfluoral alkali substances, which is it's a synthetic chemical that is used in all sorts of treatment of water resistance, heat resistance, grease resistance, anything that you and I have used over our lifetime for convenience, whether it's in your carpet, on your clothes, in your shoes. This is what Wolverine used it on the Hush Puppy shoes. These are things that were in Teflon tape, in Teflon pans. It's things that 3M made, DuPont made, all sorts of conveniences we've had over the past, 40, 50, 60 years, that now we're starting to learn maybe it wasn't the best thing to be using at that time.
Well, before we go any further, let's talk a little bit about this, because you said it's not confined to Belmont or to Kent County for that matter. And this task force that the governor has announced that he's putting together will be looking all around. So this is what you're dealing with in your district, at least what we've reported on. Some of it appears to have been connected to Wolverine, but these other places around the state necessarily would not be.
Right. Any areas that have had air bases, or even just airports in general, any areas that have had heavy industry with, it doesn't have to be tanneries, it could be plating industries. There are a lot of these chemicals that are in these areas that really we didn't know existed or were in our water system until just recently in the last few years, because we haven't been able to test for them. So this is something that colleagues of mine in northern Michigan, I know there's been some issues over in Ann Arbor, so it's just not Belmont. This is something that I think the governor realizes that this is bigger than just what has happened in these sites that Wolverine had put some of their disposals in.
So what do we do? I mean, obviously there's the task force, that's a beginning. Does the state somehow get involved in the testing? You say there's only a handful of these machines. I mean, is that a potential?
So yeah, it's something that I sent a letter to the governor looking for resources. Now, I to be perfectly honest, it was resources for my district, but what these resources would be is, what people want is accurate and timely information. We need that for our citizens. Why not appropriate the money to purchase some of this equipment that we can test so we don't have to wait 6 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks to get tests back. This is something that I think is very, very important, not only to our citizens to know if they have an issue, and then we also need to start figuring out where these plumes of water are. And that's a lot of manpower, and it's going to take some money and to drill these wells. And that's really the only way to do it, to have monitoring wells throughout the state and throughout these areas that have this potential contaminant.
Well, I don't want to be the guy who's counting the beans, but what kind of money are we talking about?
Well, I think coming up here, it's going to be maybe tens of millions to start out. I know the equipment to do this testing, I think, is being proposed at $4.5 million, but that's to set up the whole lab. Now, if we become a lab, maybe we can be a resource for everybody in the Midwest. That's something that we can have a little return on our investment if we start testing for other private areas or other states as well. What gets expensive is the ongoing monitoring, but we have to do it because we have so little data about this contaminant. We don't even know exactly the correlation between health and this PFAS. I know it seems problematic, and it seems there's a lot of causation from one to the other, but still, there's too many unknowns. You can't say because you drank this water, you have this cancer. You can assume that, but there's so many other factors involved. So I think part of this hiring someone to actually start to do these health studies for us, because I think we deserve this for our citizens. Our citizens deserve this, because really the responsibility of government is health and safety and the welfare. And I think that's something that I think money appropriated for something like this, I think, is money well spent.
The circumstances should not be equated, but one can't help but look at the response that the governor and the state are putting on this and look back to the water crisis in Flint, when they did not seem to act with the same urgency or dispatch. Is it fair to assume that part of this response is lesson learned?
Yes, exactly. I think we need to be very, very cautious on something like this, be more proactive than reactive on something like this. I can't say that this is like what happened in Flint, but I think you're right. We did learn our lesson. I think the administration learned their lessons. We've appropriated a lot of money for the city of Flint to help out with that problem. I think this is more statewide. So I think all our citizens need to be aware that this issue with PFAS could be anywhere and everywhere in our groundwater.
When you try to chase down these plumes with the monitoring wells and figure out where everything is, and I should say, as a matter of clarity, that you and I live in the area, not the area that's affected, but as you find out where it goes. It could be of even more concern. Some of the schools in the Rockford School District have been making sure kids have bottled water, those that are on wells, all of those things that are going on. This is not a problem that can just be solved by turning a switch, and it's not something that's going to be over next month or even next year.
No, we're talking years. Short-term solutions are filters on your house. Getting a filter on your tap water, getting a whole house filter, whatever filtration systems are out there, I still think that's short term. Even another issue would be bringing municipal water to these areas. That's going to get very expensive to do. It's something that until we know more data and where these plumes are, that this stuff doesn't go away, but it moves. And depending on, I'm not a geologist, but how dense the sand is and what type of sand and where the water tables are, it seems to be moving south and east from that Belmont site. But, you could have two neighbors and one be fine and the other one have some levels of this PFAS, and it really depends also on the depth of your well. These are our neighbors, these are our friends, our kids go to these schools. This is something that I have meetings every Monday and Friday on this in regards to both the Kent County Health Department and DEQ. If the citizens need more information, please contact me. I know the Kent County Health Department, I know DEQ have wonderful websites with lots of information. Even Wolverine Worldwide has a great website that you can go to and get more information. We got to communicate. I'm not looking to scare anybody, but communicate and get that information out. It needs to be timely and needs to be accurate. And anybody who's willing to help, I'd be more than happy to sit down with and make sure that we use them as a resource.
When you think of this in terms of, we've talked about the money, we've talked about the time, we've talked about the fear, we've talked about all of the impact, do we get to a point where we start thinking that this changes the value of certain areas based on, I got to believe that a house with a whole house filter on it gets some kind of a discount.
Right. Well, the filtration helps though. Yeah. So if you're trying to sell a house and you're on a well and you're in an area, it's been proven that a full house filter, which adds value to the house, fixes this problem, just like getting a water softener fixes a problem with hard water. Now, you're saying, is this going to solve the problem and cure all your health issues? No, I mean, if you and I right now were to get tested, I bet you we both have PFAS in our blood system because there's so many other parts or so many other things that have PFAS in it. You're talking pizza boxes and fast food wrappers, used to be in dental floss and toothpaste and underarm deodorant, and it just doesn't go away. So even though we don't use these chemicals anymore, I think since 2005 we don't use these chemicals, we've learned it's something that's in your system. So whether it was something we did 15 years ago or 25 years ago that has caused a health issue, I don't know. There's so many things. That's why we need the data. We need to do these things, and it's going to take some time. We need to research this more.
As we said, the governor has set up a task force that will be working across the state, and as the senator pointed out, he's asked for more state resources to look into the water problems. We'll continue to follow that story, and we'll be back with more To the Point. Welcome back to the Point. We continue our conversation with State Senator Peter MacGregor. He does have other priorities, including everything from the vets home to the budget. Let's talk about some issues that you've been working on over the years, going back even to your House days. One of them was the Grand Rapids Home for Veterans. Mm-hmm. There has been a huge focus on that facility, and in just the last year, I think, you've passed some legislation that is going to change the dynamics for the home here and add some new homes, mm-hmm. right?
It's creating the Veterans Home Authority. What we're finding is that the state of Michigan, because of our bureaucracy and all the different hurdles that we have put in front of ourselves to slow things down, it has caused problems. Two things, we needed to have good leadership in the home, but we also needed them to be as nimble as possible in making decisions. When they want to spend some money to help out the veterans, they had to go through the whole appropriations process, and you know how difficult that is sometimes at the state level. We needed, I think it's a lot the same reason that the airport went to an authority, because it just was more manageable, more efficient, and so moving forward, the homes will be under the authority and we're going to be building some new homes. I think the one in Grand Rapids will probably be on the same site as the existing home. We'll repurpose the older buildings, but build new homes so we can pull down some Medicare and Medicaid dollars at the same time.
And part of the goal would be also to have homes where the population is, because right now there's not one in Southeast Michigan.
Right.
We talked with Senator Kniezek about that, who is a veteran and who has a keen interest in it. So there could be, almost certainly will be, smaller footprint for these homes, but more of them.
Right. I think the model number is about 120 to 150 beds or rooms. I mean, because this is going to be home. This is not a nursing home. It's home for the veterans. A lot of them do need some skilled care, but to have one in Detroit, which the majority of the members are from Detroit, the members that are in the Grand Rapids home, but we need it in Detroit. We need one in Lansing. We need one up north. Lower Peninsula up north. We'll have the new one. So I could see having 6 throughout the state. I think that's the plan, to have 6. I think the first start is let's get 3. Let's get one in Detroit and one up north, say Saginaw or Midland area, and then possibly the new one in Grand Rapids.
Other issues that have been ongoing, you've worked for some child care changes, talking about foster kids and trying to get the money to flow. And again, as you talked about with the Veterans Home, the cumbersome circumstance that was set up that made it difficult to get things done. Sounds like this Childcare Arena
has some of that too. I've been working on, I call it the Child Care Fund issue in my office. I've been working on for about 2 years, talking to service providers, say like Bethany Christian Services, who provide all sorts of services, especially to our foster care children. May go 4 to 6 months without getting paid. And they're supposed to be getting paid from the counties and the state. Well, looking into it, the process was so convoluted, but there were so many people and so many checkoffs between the courts, the counties, the local DHFs, the state, that were involved with this. It was like a 9-part, under the old circumstances, there's like a 9-part form that everybody had to check off. And if it failed anywhere, it slowed down the whole thing. So finally, working with all the people who are involved with it, all the stakeholders, we finally came to an agreement that this is the way it should be, and it's pretty much the state pay first, making sure the people who are providing the service for these foster care children, get paid for their services, and then all the backroom accounting can be done later on. But it was, you wouldn't think it would be difficult, but when you start to have 4 or 5 different bureaucracy, when you're talking about the courts, the counties, the local DHS office, and the state, it's very, very cumbersome.
And so where are you with that?
Well, it passed the Senate, got it out. I'm going to be having a committee hearing in the House last week in November. So I'm looking forward to that.
A couple of other things before we let you go, and we appreciate you taking time to come in and talk with us. We're during the break for Thanksgiving over in Lansing. This is a good opportunity to take a look at some of the initiatives that you and your colleagues are working on that you don't hear about every day. Here's one that we discussed earlier, and that is first-time homebuyer savings accounts. How would that work?
So this is a brand new piece of legislation that I introduced. It went through the Finance Committee and passed unanimously through the Finance Committee, so it's very bipartisan. So what this is, it's setting up a savings account for first-time home ownership. Whether you're a young adult and mom and dad or grandpa and grandma has set this up, or an adult that is kind of stuck in renting and needs that little help to get to the next step. So it's set up a lot like the college savings plan. So the person who sets up and donates the money gets the tax savings, gets some sort of relief on your income tax. At the same time, this is money that can be used for down payment and closing costs. So we're still in negotiations on what the right number is to land on. How much should someone have? You don't want someone to buy too much of a house, but to be able to put down $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 because you've saved that money over a period of 5 or 10 years, or been helped to save that money. It's making sure, especially with the youth, to keep some of that talent here, those assets here in our state. I think it's a great program. It's not going to solve all our issues, but boy, if we can keep my kids and your kids here in the state and have them purchase homes, I mean, that's a great starter of roots in the state of Michigan.
One of the other things that you're working with the governor on, something he's been pretty adamant about, and that's getting our kids, our children that are graduating from high school into training that will get them into jobs that are available here, and a lot of that is skilled and technical trades. One of the things he talks about you're working on is getting more specified career counseling at the high school level.
Some enhanced career counseling. I mean, when you and I were growing up, it was here, Pete, you're going to go to this four-year university because that's the way you do it. There was a stigma again for going to some sort of skilled trade. We got to get away from that. We got to make sure we have to do these career path and career counseling for our kids. We need our curriculum to be more flexible. Instead of having to take a foreign language, how about taking some sort of computer language, or taking some sort of health career class instead of taking phys ed. Having that flexibility. Now, this doesn't mean that a foreign language and phys ed are bad things to take, but giving that individual that flexibility, so they, in that counseling, to enhance their ability to make good decisions. Not everybody was set up to go to a four-year college. Some people like to work with their hands. We need to embrace that with these students, and I think I'm going to be working with the governor on this and his team. It's some legislation that I'll probably be introducing here in the last week in November.
And finally, you said something before we started, and I kind of took a deep breath because it was a little jarring, but you're right. The current fiscal budget has been in place for a little over a month and a half. Mm-hmm. Nobody knows that because it just happens automatically. It's not the drama that we've had back when the economy was much worse off here in the state of Michigan. But you said, when I said, so what are you working on? You said, well, starting pretty soon, you're going to be immersed in the budget. I mean, that process is going to start very soon, and it's going to go right through the spring into the early summer.
Well, the governor proposes his budget in early February. But between now and February is all the different departments gearing up because they have to propose something to the governor so he can put it all together. So I'm already working with DEQ and their issues, especially with this PFAS issue we have, Department of Health and Human Services, Medicaid's always, Healthy Michigan's a big issue, mental health is, I mean, these are all autism, I mean, I can keep naming them. These are all issues that are continue to grow and get more expensive, and we got to make sure that we're spending the taxpayers' dollars very appropriate. We got to be as transparent as possible when dealing with this stuff because we're not going to be able to do it all. But you got to do your homework now because between February and June, I am going to be swamped with budget. I sit on 4 different budgets, and it gets a little hairy during that time. The stress level goes a little high.
Well, and one of the things that I always point out when we start talking about budgets in the state of Michigan, that this past year about $56 billion, and more than half of that is money that really can't be moved anywhere.
I would even say, I would say probably 3/4 of it we can't really do a thing.
So those
with.
Are dedicated funds that a lot of it's federal flow through, but it comes in. So you don't say, okay, I want to take this money out of here and put it over here. It just doesn't work that way. So that makes budgeting even more challenging.
Right, and if you want to cut a program that has some federal dollars on it, we may be spending $5, but we may be getting another $10 for the program from the feds. So it's a $15 cut on that. And so it does multiply, and so it does affect services. And it's easy to say I'm going to cut a program, but then when you have people hollering on how well a service has been performing, and that's why it's good to have the performance-based services on there. Show us, if I give you $1, show me how you're going to use it, and show me how it works, and it saves tax dollars in the long run. Obviously, debt is a big issue that we worry about. We don't have to worry about, our budgets are always structurally sound, but we do have a lot of debt still in this, especially with legacy costs. That's going to be a huge issue because we just went through reform for teachers' retirement, and part of that was making sure we pay off the debt. We stopped the bleeding, but we got to appropriate some money to make sure we bring down that debt.
Our thanks to Senator MacGregor, and we'll be back with more To the Point. Obviously, the water well contamination in Kent County is a big concern for Senator MacGregor and for others. It's a story that we have covered extensively, and we will continue to do so. We'll also keep an eye on the final few days of session as the Senate and House will go back after Thanksgiving. Next week, you'll hear from Senator David Kniezek. To the Point.